Hey there, Slashaholics. Something that I loved from the movie Freddy vs. Jason ended up omitted from the novelization, and because it's a part of the movie that I really enjoy, I'm going to go ahead and include it at the beginning of the upload. Just want to make sure you know this is not part of the novelization. This is just a special little introduction to the book by me, because one of my favorite parts was left out of the book, and I wanted to include it at the beginning of this audiobook. So here it is.
My children. From the very beginning, it was the children who gave me my power. The Springwood Slasher. That's what they called me. My reign of terror was legendary. Dozens of children would fall by my blades. Then the parents of Springwood came for me, taking justice into their own hands. When I was alive, I might have been a little naughty, but after they killed me, I became something much worse. The stuff nightmares are made of. The children still feared me, and their fear gave me the power to invade their dreams. And that's when the fun really began. Until they figured out a way to forget about me, to erase me completely. Being dead wasn't a problem, but being forgotten, now that's a bitch. I can't come back if no one remembers me. I can't come back if no one's afraid. I had to search the bowels of hell, but I found someone who'll make them remember. He may get the blood, but I'll get the glory. And that fear is my ticket home.
And now, Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan Hand. Prologue. A cry in the darkness. No, not darkness. The room was dimly lit by the flame from an old furnace, and there was a smell of rusted iron in the air. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the smell of blood. Another cry. Someone was in the room, but the cry didn't come from him. The cry was the terrified whimper of a small girl, whereas the figure outlined as a shadow in the light of the open furnace gate was a man. And he was just a man right now. In fact, he was a pretty regular guy. He had a house, a wife, and a daughter of his own. And he had a job. Well, actually, he had two jobs, and they were both done down here, in the boiler room of the power plant, where he was throwing a child's doll into the raging flames of the furnace. The face of the doll started to blacken and melt. Soon its entire body caught fire and was turning into pink plastic, pulp, dressed in smoldering white and blue polyester. Its brown nylon hair flared up in a plume of toxic smoke. Its glass eyes sunk and fell, perversely morphing its features from baby face to death's head, from cradle to grave in a matter of seconds. But little dollies don't cry. The man laughed as the plastic girl went up in smoke. This was all part of the show, the chase, the catch, the fear. It was okay for the toy to burn up quickly like that, but his real victim would have to take much longer to kill. Let's rephrase that. His real victim would have to take much longer to torture, mutilate, and then kill. That's better. Much better.
Come to Daddy!
The man slammed the furnace door shut, confident that nothing would remain of this piece of evidence. What? You think a grown man would play with dolls? What kind of sick bastard would do that? No. This man, this creature, this twisted fuck, he only played house with the real thing. He played with real little girls. He had fun with them. He played with them in the nastiest, most evil, most unforgivable ways. He played with them to death, all 29 of them. This little bitch was number 30. Lucky for some, unlucky for others. The furnace door closed with a groaning, grating sound that reverberated throughout the room. And that's when her crying turned into screaming. The sweet young girl huddled in the corner of the room already knew that she was going to die. The man had kidnapped her. He had stolen her from Mommy and Daddy. He had offered her nice things, and he wore a funny red and green sweater, red and green stripes, but he'd brought her down here, to the bad place. It was all hot and dark down here. The place was old, and it was filled with pipes and metal stairs and stuff, and boilers and ovens. And no one ever came down here except the bad man. He'd dragged her down here and tied her up, and then he'd hurt her, real bad. He had these gloves, these bad gloves. Some of them had spikes on them, some of them had animal claws, but his favorite was the one he was wearing today. His favorite glove had 5 long razor-sharp knives fixed over the 5 grimy fingers of his right hand. She could see it now, standing like a black silhouette in front of the blazing furnace. The man was sharpening his finger knives on a stone. Sparks flew in all directions from the deadly glove, and in the flickering shower of lights, the girl could see the man's eyes. He was watching her. The girl knew the man was going to hurt her because each time he came and hurt her, he stood and walked in a funny way. He wriggled his knives as if they were alive. He always did that before he hurt her. He was doing it now. Tears streamed down her 5-year-old face. She didn't understand death. She never knew death, but some human instinct within her told her that this final approach of the bad man was the end. He laughed under his breath as he walked step by step towards the corner of the boiler room, festering at the very heart of the industrial complex. Oh yeah, he was a regular guy. He had a home, his murderous lair. He had a wife. He'd killed the snooping bitch. He had a daughter. She'd been seized for adoption. He had a mother, a nun raped by 100 maniacs, whose acts of foul violation gave Freddy his ungodly life, while his mother spent the rest of her days locked up in an asylum for the criminally insane. He had a daytime job. He worked in this boiler room. And he had a night job. He was dragging the blades of his glove hand along one of the twisted old pipes surrounding it. Sparks flew as the 5 killing razors drew nearer and nearer to their pretty little victim. She wanted to beg with him, to plead, but she'd already tried that, and it was of no use. It only made him laugh. Her sad little face would have broken any normal man's heart, but this was no normal man. Now he was above her, tall and powerful. All she could do was huddle on the floor and scream. Freddy breathed deeply, his face running with sweat. He wanted to slice her up so bad. Inside the furnace, the baby doll was melting away to nothing. Outside the furnace, Freddy Krueger moved in for the kill. This screaming little brat was getting on his nerves. Quick as a rattlesnake, Krueger sprang forward with the deadly glove. He flicked his fingers apart and aimed 2 blades right for the whites of her tear-stained eyes. Pretty girl.
Pretty, pretty girl.
The knives found their mark, and the girl screamed in agony. Suddenly, Krueger was upon her, savaging her flesh in the darkness of the boiler room. The chamber echoed to the sound of her helpless screams and to the blood-soaked rending of butchery. It was all over in just a minute. She was his.
God, it felt... Freeze!
Before he knew it, Krueger was caught in the beam of 2 flashlights. Cops, with their guns leveled right at his face. The sick bastard just stood there, his cutting blades dripping with the blood of the dead girl. Officer Perry couldn't believe it. Except for the glove and the crazy striped sweater, Krueger looked like an ordinary guy. Black boots, brown pants, blonde hair. But that glove! Only an hour earlier, Officer Perry had received a tip-off that Krueger was the killer, and everyone in Springwood knew another child was missing. So Perry had no time to waste if he wanted to save the poor kid's life. He had broken into Krueger's home, but Freddy wasn't there. Perry had searched the place and found something he would never forget. He found Krueger's lair. He found the place where Krueger planned his attacks. The place where Krueger kept his private, bloody trophies. The place where Krueger made his special equipment. Back outside, Perry had put out an APB on Krueger, but he and his partner already knew where to look. They'd raced over here to the power plant on the south side of town, where Krueger worked. Perry knew he was breaking the rules, but a kid's life was at stake, damn it. If only he could have got here a minute sooner, he might have been able to... But no, the girl was dead. She'd been hacked to pieces by this guy with the glove. It was with grim satisfaction that Perry slammed the cuffs on Krueger and began to read him his rights. But Officer Perry had fucked up. Bad. Krueger was made to stand trial for the abduction and murder of 30 minors, or at least that was the plan. On the first day of the first session of the trial, the case was completely dismissed. Officer Perry had gone into both Krueger's house and the power plant without a search warrant, which meant that every single piece of evidence the cop had found was inadmissible in court. Questioned about the incident at the boiler room, Krueger had the balls to say he'd been trying to save the girl. He said he'd heard the girl's cries and had gone to help her. His performance was nauseating. People in the public gallery, parents of the children he'd slaughtered, had to sit there and choke back their anger as Krueger got up and gave his statement. He told the judge,
I heard the screams, and I ran there as fast as I could. But it was too late. By the time I found her, the girl was already dead. I was worried the killer might still be around, you know. So I put the glove on for self-defense. I found it lying on the floor by the body. I guess I wasn't thinking straight. I can't tell you how relieved I was when Officer Perry showed up like that.
The courtroom exploded with outrage. Everybody knew Krueger was the killer. When prior to Krueger's arrest, Officer Perry had broken into Krueger's house, he'd found enough evidence there to have the bastard fried. He'd found photos of the dead kids along with some of the kids' belongings, scraps of clothing, toys, bits of hair, that Freddy had kept as grisly trophies. Perry had even found the tools Krueger had used to make his sick glove. The cops were certain that if they searched the power plant where Freddy worked and where he was arrested, they'd find cremated remains of all the missing children there. But just because Perry hadn't followed proper procedure, all the evidence had to be left just where it was. The judge's hands were tied. It was crazy. For Christ's sake, Krueger had been caught red-handed. Literally, fresh blood was found on each of the blades Krueger had been wearing when he was arrested. There was even blood on the damned clothes Krueger was wearing in court. But for what? Krueger, you bastard! Freddy just sat there smiling, not a hair out of place, dressed neatly in his red and green sweater, safe in the fact no one could touch him. They had no legal evidence. There was nothing anyone could do to stop Krueger as he swaggered out of the courthouse into the bright sunny afternoon of a perfect Springwood day. Some of the murdered kids' parents came out after him, but what could they do? They pushed him and shouted at him, but he'd had worse fights with the dead kids, and they hadn't bothered him, so it was no big deal. He could just sharpen up his glove and then start all over again. But the grin on Krueger's face that afternoon lasted about 5 minutes. The moment he reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, the real trouble started. People attacked him. They punched him, hurled abuse, threats. Yeah, Krueger might have made a few lawyers rich, and he might have postponed his date with the chair, but he wasn't going to escape justice. That night, the newspaper headlines all shouted the same unbelievable fact. Suspected child killer set free. But in the main square of Springwood, A lynch mob had formed among the good people of the town, and Krueger had fled for his stinking life. As the vigilantes gathered, Perry didn't know whether to arrest them or join them until Sheriff Williams showed up. The sheriff, Principal Shea from Springwood High School, and some of the other municipal leaders soon took charge of the mob and got everybody organized. Williams sent 2 men over to the Krueger house, but the place was empty, which meant just one thing. Krueger had bolted to the only place he would feel safe, the power plant. The boiler level at the base of the power plant was huge. A guy could hide down there for weeks, and nobody knew that infernal place like Krueger. Long, uneventful workdays had driven Freddy mad with boredom. He'd started exploring the plant just to pass the time. But after a while, he came to see the potential of the place. All those abandoned rooms, all those dark, empty corridors, all those bolted cellars where no one could hear you, no matter how long and how hard you screamed. The boiler level was a rusted maze, the ultimate in tortured, bloody privacy. That's why he'd taken his victims there. His victims. Kids. Children. Little boys and girls, aged no more than 7 years old. He'd killed them and cremated their bodies in the furnace of the power plant. How many Springwood light bulbs had been powered by the corpses of the townsfolk's own dead children? That bastard. Okay, if Krueger wanted to stay in the boiler room, he could stay there forever. He could die in his filthy murder hole. By sundown, Springwood's finest had gathered outside the power plant. They were all there: Sheriff Williams, Principal Shea, Officer Perry, parents of the kids Krueger had murdered, parents of kids Krueger hadn't murdered, god damn it. And they were all armed with Molotov cocktails, standing outside the boiler room, ready to turn up the heat. It was a fine, clear night, and the air was still when Sheriff Williams lit the first bottle and hurled it clean through the broken, dirty pane of the boiler room window. And that was the signal for the people of Springwood to get their revenge. Bottle after bottle burst its explosive contents through the doors and windows of the boiler room. And in no time at all, the place erupted with the intense heat of an all-consuming flame. Perry took his newspaper, rolled it up, put the scroll of paper into the gasoline-filled bottle, set fire to the paper with his lighter, and got ready to hurl the Molotov cocktail through the main window of the boiler room. He'd seen Krueger standing over the body of that poor little girl. Krueger had stabbed her through the eyes. "Fry in hell, you bastard!" And Krueger was a bastard, the bastard son of 100 maniacs. But that night, fate decreed that Freddy Krueger would not perish in the righteous flames of the parents that he'd so very badly wronged. When the first bottle broke on the boiler room floor, Freddy was already choosing his next victim. He thought he was safe. He had retreated to his special room, the place he had set up in the bowels of the building, where he took all his little friends for some razor fun. It was the only place the cops hadn't found. He laughed. The page he'd ripped from the local school yearbook he'd stolen was a font of inspiration. The rows and rows of photos of teensy-weensy boys and girls were his muse, and this year had been a very fine vintage indeed. 29 of the faces had been crossed out.
Number 30?
The cops had tried to deny Freddy his fun, but they'd shown up too late. He slashed the photo of the dead girl with his razor glove. She was history.
Now who's next? Ah, another sweet girl.
He stabbed the photo with one of his razors, cutting clean through the page.
Time to get back to work.
And that's when Sheriff Williams' Molotov hit the floor.
No!
Angel-faced Freddy looked about in horror as glass bomb after glass bomb shattered on the floors and walls around him.
It's not fair! They can't do this! I'm not guilty! Not guilty!
Soon every surface in Freddy's dirty, disgusting lair was ablaze. There was nowhere for Freddy to run, no escape. But though he didn't know it, Freddy Krueger wasn't finished yet. In fact, the real fun was only just beginning. Outside, the people watched as Freddy's hideout burned. They couldn't see Krueger himself, but the basement of the power plant had become hell on earth. Smoke billowed through the broken windows. There was no way out for Krueger. He was finished. Springwood had had its revenge. Justice had been done. Sheriff Williams set the gas canister to the ground. He noticed that the people around him were holding hands, taking strength from one another. These people weren't killers, they were just good, honest townsfolk who'd been pushed too far. They had no choice but to do this. They had to deal with the killer of their children. Williams could understand this. Sometimes you just gotta protect your children no matter what the cost. No matter what the cost. The last intact window exploded with heat, and through the sound of breaking glass came the terrible shrieks of a burning man. Freddy Krueger was dead. Or so everyone thought. Had any of the Elm Street parents been able to see into the heart of the fire within that boiler room, they would have witnessed the forging of a horrific pact beyond all human comprehension. For Freddy was not alone in the basement. He had been found. 3 dream demons, ancient and all-powerful, had been searching throughout eternity, roaming the dreams of the living until they found the most vile and twisted human ever to exist, Freddy Krueger. And now, at the point of Krueger's impending destruction, the dream demons took it upon themselves to appear before him. Freddy looked on in excitement as the 3 disembodied skulls appeared out of nowhere and hurtled through the air towards him. The skulls were cruel and bestial in appearance. They were bathed in an unholy light, and they had short spine-like tails that trailed through the air as they darted this way and that around the child slayer.
"Freddy,"
growled one of the demons.
"we know what you want,"
proclaimed the second. Krueger stood erect and snarled.
"I want it all."
Even facing imminent death, the maniac was still in control.
"Of course you do,"
agreed the second demon.
"Then open up,"
commanded the third.
"and you shall be forever."
One by one, the demons slammed into Freddy, vanishing as they crashed into his very being. And in this moment, the demons transformed Freddy. They gave the power to cross between the line of mortal existence and the ability to turn the nightmares of man into reality. The demons had made Freddy immortal. Krueger screamed as the white heat flames of retribution melted his face. Though saved by the dream demons, his body had to die before he could be reborn, and it would take many years for him to regain enough strength to return and use his hellish powers. But when that day came, when Freddy could finally be the dark master of people's nightmares, he'd make those Elm Street bastards pay. I dreamed about this guy in a dirty red and green sweater, and he had these fingernails that he scraped along things. Actually, they were more like knives or something, like he'd made them himself. Anyway, they made this horrible screeching noise. The nightmare on Elm Street was beginning. Tina Gray was the first to die, the first girl killed by Freddy in her dreams. But when Tina died in her nightmare, she died for real. She was slaughtered like a pig, flung around her folks' bedroom by some invisible force, gutted, hung to dry, then slammed down onto the ground, a corpse. Next came Tina's boyfriend, Rob, who was strangled by a blanket and hung while in police custody. The cops called it suicide, but Rob had died in his sleep. His nightmare had killed him. One by one, the kids on Elm Street were being murdered, but no one could work out how. No one realized that the victims were all children of those people who had burned Freddy Krueger to death. It took Tina's best friend Nancy Thompson to see what was happening, and Freddy returned the compliment by taking a special interest in Nancy. He appeared in her dreams, his face and hands stretching through the wall above her bed as she slept. He gave her friends nightmares, impossible dreams that always ended in death. Nancy tried to fight back. She warned her friends, "Whatever you do, don't fall asleep." But it was no use. Every night Freddy came back. Freddy, that man in her dreams, the man with the burned face, that hat and the red and green sweater, and those awful, horrible fingers. Krueger seemed to delight in tormenting her.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
That's what he said, and just to prove it, Freddy murdered Nancy's real boyfriend, Glenn. In fact, Krueger liquidized the little bastard. Glenn's remains spat up out of the bed in a tower of blood, spraying his entire bedroom crimson. It was Freddy's best dream kill yet. But all the time the kids were dying, they didn't even know Freddy was real. They didn't know he'd once been a normal guy. They didn't know Freddy Krueger was Elm Street's guilty secret. Nancy had tried talking to her mom. "Fred Krueger, do you know who that is, Mom? You better tell me if you know, because he's after me now." "He can't get you. He's dead. Mommy killed him." Marge Thompson had been part of the crowd that had torched Krueger's hideout. So had Nancy's father, police officer Donald Thompson. They had killed Freddy. They had heard his screams. They were there. They had seen it with their own eyes. And they had buried Krueger's torched remains in a secret location. So whatever Nancy was thinking, it all had to be in her imagination somehow. But Nancy wasn't imagining it. In her dream, she saw Krueger's boiler room. She saw Freddy's scarred and disfigured face, and she knew that glove made of razor-sharp knives. And then came the real horror. When Freddy next attacked Nancy's dreams, she struggled with him and grabbed hold of his battered fedora. And when she awoke, she still had his hat in her hands. She had pulled it out of her dreams into the real world. This set the scene for the final showdown. Alone with no one to help or even believe her, Nancy dragged Krueger out of her nightmare and into the reality of her home on Elm Street, where she set fire to him and denied him the fear he needed to exist. Nancy stood up to Freddy and sent the bastard straight back to hell.
Darkness. It always ends in darkness.
He had tried so many ways to get back, to get some soul food, but it always ended in darkness. They had saved him from the boiler room fire. They had promised him he was eternal. They said that as long as he served them, he would live forever. But it always came back to this long, solitary darkness, with only the sound of his ragged, depleted breathing to remind him he was still unalive. At first, when Krueger was just a guy in the boiler room, the kids had been for kicks, a hobby. But now, those meddling Elm Street parents had made him into something else. Krueger needed the kids, needed them for strength. He needed to feed on their lives, their fear, their very souls. Every now and then he would find a way to break free of this place. He would slip back through into the minds of some horny, pimple-faced brats with too much dreaming time on their hands. On each occasion, he thought he would be free to terrorize Elm Street for a long, long time. But each and every time, some smart-mouthed bitch would send him straight back to hell. Even his own family had turned against him. And now so much time had passed. So many kids had already died. Their dreams were his way through. They were a portal to the world of the living. But if the kids stopped dreaming about him, if they stopped having nightmares, Krueger was running out of options. The people of Elm Street were moving on.
They tried to forget their fear.
Freddy's voice was low, rasping, and then louder as it echoed through the darkness of the damned.
Lock me away like a dirty secret!
He had searched. He had looked for a way to get back, to start his work again. But it had not been easy. He had been in the darkness almost too long. His frustration would have been unbearable had it not been overcome by the howling fury that coursed through his twisted veins. Krueger was weak, but he craved vengeance. He lusted for torment, for pain,
for more fucking nightmares.
And now, after finding so many doors in hell closed to him, Freddy had come upon the answer. There was another way to make the people of Elm Street afraid.
I found someone,
he purred.
Yes, I found someone, and he'll make 'em remember.
Freddy turned his bitter, angry eyes down into a dark corner of oblivion and saw. The hockey mask lay on the ground where after the final battle the dark denizens of hell had left it. The mask was no ordinary face protector. The face it shielded was that of an abomination who had claimed hundreds and hundreds of innocent lives. Like Krueger, the owner of the hockey mask was a creature beyond death and a true killing machine. Until this moment, no man alive had been able to put an end to its relentless, bloody onslaught. But then it wasn't a man who had killed the evil known as Jason Voorhees. Less than a week earlier, Jason had been caught in a police ambush and shot to pieces. Over 100 rounds of ammunition had been pumped into Jason before a mortar shell had blown his massive body into hunks of charred meat. But this didn't kill him. Jason's foul life force survived to possess and take over a series of human victims. But these were only temporary hosts. Once Jason entered them, their bodies quickly started to degenerate. There was only one way Jason could return to full strength, and that was to be reborn through the body of another Voorhees. So Jason had returned to his hometown of Crystal Lake, where he had murdered and entered the body of his long-lost sister Diana. And through her, Jason had been reborn. But the killer had not been long behind the hockey mask again before Diana's daughter Jessica had plunged an ancient dagger into his heart. A local proverb ran, "Only through a Voorhees can he be reborn, and only a Voorhees can kill him." When Jessica's blade cut into Jason, he erupted in a starburst of lost souls and found himself trapped in a brilliant light from above. Jessica could only look on with boyfriend Stephan as the ground opened up around Jason's feet and crusted ancient hands, the hands of demons, broke up through the dirt and dragged the massive, hulking body of the maniac screaming down to hell. When the earth closed again, all that was left behind was Jason's broken hockey mask. It was over, finished. Voorhees had been killed by his own niece. Stephan put an arm around Jessica. They were both bloody and bruised. Their struggle with Jason had brought them close to death again and again, but they had pulled through, and they had won. Slowly they turned and walked away, leaving the hockey mask lying in the dirt. If the two battered survivors had waited just a couple of moments longer, they would have seen a gloved hand burst up through the soil beneath the discarded plastic face shield. Not just any glove, but one with razor-sharp blades bolted to each of the brown leather fingers. And they would have heard a ragged, guttural voice, the voice of Freddy Krueger.
"I've searched all of hell for someone like you."
Freddy sounded almost playful.
"You're my ticket home!"
The razor blades locked into the holes of the cracked white hockey mask, then snatched the mask down through the earth, where it would join Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger in hell. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been the prologue of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization of the movie written by Stephen Hand. This is a book I've been looking forward to for a long time, and this is my first time reading it. A lot of the books I've narrated has been my first time reading them. And I gotta say, other than the one thing that's sticking out like a sore thumb, no pun intended, is the writer talking about Freddy having a blade on his thumb, the fifth finger. But I can look past that. That's not going to bug me too much, as long as it doesn't come up a whole lot. But I really enjoyed the prologue here. I did that little intro thing because that's one of the best parts of the movie in the beginning. You know, Freddy's little monologue. And it's not in the book, so I thought I'd have some fun with it. Put it in front of the book before I started reading the prologue and everything. Something I wanted to do. But as far as the prologue goes, I gotta say, I really enjoy the in-depth structure of this prologue. I love that we not only got this awesome in-depth description of how Freddy killed his victims and his last victim there before being caught, and you know, how he went to court, how he got out of it, and I thought it was Freddy's style that he would sit there and say, I went there to rescue people, or I heard the girl screaming, went to save her. Just seemed so much like something Fred Krueger would do. And it was kind of cool that we got a more in-depth view of how he was killed by the townsfolk. And I love the little history lesson the book gave on the events of A Nightmare on Elm Street 1 through 6. Now, granted, I thought after as much details we got about the first Nightmare on Elm Street, I thought that it was going to keep going and give us a bunch of details from each sequel. But that's okay. It was really good, really fun to read that. It was a fun read. I thought it was great the author went into all that detail to give that kind of history lesson on the character of Freddy Krueger. But what really blew my mind for this prologue, and the thing I'm most excited about, is the fact that he completely referenced Jason Goes to Hell. Something the movie did not do, even though Jason Goes to Hell was the precursor to Freddy vs. Jason. That's what set this whole thing up. It might have taken a decade, but you know what? That's what started it, and I loved reading that part, about Stephan and Jessica defeating Jason. And then knowing that Freddy, pretty much saw that going on, saw the mask, reached up, grabbed it, pulled it down, and put his game plan together. I know some of you guys have got to love the fact that Jason Goes to Hell was referenced here in the prologue, setting up the story of Freddy vs. Jason. And I can't wait to hear from you all in the comments section to let me know your thoughts on the whole Jason Goes to Hell connection thing there here in the novelization. I always thought the movie should have shown that, should have referenced that. In the movie, we got all that reference of Freddy's backstory, but then we just started with Jason pretty much, dreaming or whatever that he's going through killing these people at Crystal Lake. And then we saw, like, his dead body against a tree, regenerate. But I always thought it would have been cool if they had referenced Jason Goes to Hell. And the fact that the book did it, I'm in love with this book already. I cannot wait to dive back into it. If the author took these liberties with the story and referenced Jason Goes to Hell for the prologue and gave us that much of an in-depth history lesson on Freddy's past, then I can only imagine what he's done with the rest of the book. And I cannot wait to read it for you. And I'll be back very soon to do just that. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about this prologue in the comments section below, and
pleasant dreams!
Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination.
Greetings, Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey guys, this is Jason Brooks, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Vengeance.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Patterson, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello, kiddies. This is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
And you're listening.
And you're listening.
I just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening.
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
to the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
The 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian. Keep listening.